They laughed when Lily said her mother was in the special forces, turned her truth into a joke so easily as if laughter could erase pain. She learned to fold shame into quiet, to make her shoulders small so strangers wouldn't see the wounds beneath. At night, she counted breaths instead of names, keeping vigil over memories that never stopped knocking. A faded photograph folded in her pocket weighed more than coins. It was proof and a promise she dared not show. A stranger's slipped note, "Do not trust her," turned a city joke into a cold, precise danger. This is the story of a black girl's patience cracking into something fierce, a slow, relentless unmaking that will demand answers. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. The rain came thin and steady, not the kind that drowns sound, but the kind that smooths it out. One soft, regular tapping that made the street look like a watercolor drawing someone had smeared with a wet thumb. Lily Carter stood beneath the awning of the closed bakery, clutching a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Steam rose in hesitant curls and disappeared into the gray air. Her jacket was too light for the January wind, and the collar hunched up around her neck, like it was trying to hide her from the weather and from the city at once. She had a photograph folded into the pocket of her coat, edges worn, the colors a little duller than they used to be. When she slipped her hand into the pocket and felt the paper between her fingers, the world pulled close around her as if waiting to hear what she might do next. Holding that photo was an act of careful courage. It reminded her of something she did not want to forget and could not let herself repeat. You would have called Lily nervous if you watched her the way strangers watch people on street corners. Quick glances, small gestures, a tendency to speak about herself too fast when she was trying to sound ordinary. But she was not merely nervous. There was a kind of patient ache in her, an ache that had the shape of unfinished sentences and unopened doors. She was 23, with hair the color of old chestnuts and eyes that held the restless attention of someone who always looked a second too long at things. She knew how to keep a coffee cup from trembling so others would not see, but she also knew the names of every bus route in the city and where the good streetlights were at night. Practical things had a way of keeping her steady. Lily's life had become measured by small, careful routines. Wake, work, pay bills, come home. Repeat. Each repetition was a thin plank she walked on so the memory under her feet would not open into a drop. Her mother's name, Rebecca Carter, sat on her tongue like a secret she both wanted to shout and to bury. Rebecca had once been a presence that filled rooms. Tall, decisive, and contained. Now she was a single line in Lily's past, half-remembered commands, and the faint smell of gun oil in the back of Lily's mind. People in the neighborhood said Rebecca worked overseas or that she traveled for long stretches. People also invented stories because the truth made them uncomfortable. Truth, in Lily's town, had always been an awkward thing to carry. A bus coughed to a stop across the street, flicking the puddles like they were coins. Lily watched the passengers step down. A man in a paint-streaked jacket, an elderly woman with grocery bags, a teenager with blue headphones who scrolled with his thumb. Their faces were ordinary. Lily envied their ordinariness the way one envies a warm street in winter. Ordinary kept you from standing out, from being noticed by people whose attention could do harm when it rested on the wrong things. She folded her hands around the coffee cup until the cardboard warmed her palms. In the cup was a receipt taped to the inside of the sleeve, a list of things: flour, sugar, eggs, items that meant nothing and everything. It was the kind of small, lived-in proof that someone had existed in a kitchen yesterday. It was the kind of proof Lily wanted for herself. She wanted to be the kind of person who could be counted on. She wanted to answer questions without the pause that made people uncomfortable and then laugh at the way she stalled. This morning, there was a message in her pocket, too. A single sentence scribbled on a scrap of paper in her mother's handwriting. It said, "Be careful whose kindness you take for granted." The letters were a little spidery, like someone who had learned to write in a hurry. Lily looked at the words until the ink blurred into a gray cloud. The note was not a threat. It was not even really a warning. It was a statement, like a photograph, evidence that someone had once noticed the shape of an approaching danger before it was too late. Across the street, a police car idled at the light, its engine a low rumble. The officer inside was young-looking and bored. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel with small impatience. He glanced at Lily as most people glance at things they do not think they will see again, for the fraction of a second that a face can be sampled and put away. Lily felt that glance like a pinprick and then turned her eyes back to the wet pavement. She did not want to be the kind of person who invites a long look. There is a part of you, if you are paid attention, if you have a memory that tastes like metal, that keeps a ledger. Lily kept a simple ledger of debts and favors, or rather of explanations she had to give to quiet the worried eyes of others. When she said her mother worked in the field and traveled, that was one kind of explanation. When people laughed and told her it sounded like a movie, she smiled and agreed. Better to let them laugh than to follow them into the quiet rooms where people ask the harder questions. The city around her breathed in small, anonymous ways. The clack of shoes on wet cobbles, the soft groan of delivery trucks, a child's voice muffled by distance. The gray sky had the kind of plainness that suggested anything could happen beneath it or nothing at all. Both possibilities lived close together, a thin coin spinning on a table. Lily kept her hands folded around the cup until the coffee had cooled to lukewarm. The photograph in her pocket kept its secret of what Rebecca's face looked like in the light after a long day. The note kept its neat warning. Lily drew a breath that tasted of rain and something like resolve. She had learned to carry contradictions, fierce loyalty and a shy, embarrassed pride, a reluctance to make trouble and a readiness to stand when a wrong rose in front of her. Her world was small in hours, but large in the things it avoided. Somewhere beyond the streetlight and the bakery awning, the life she wanted, rest, normal work, maybe a small apartment with a plant that did not die, waited like a promise she did not trust. The photograph was heavy in her pocket, and she let herself imagine that one day it would be light enough to forget. For now, it was part of her rhythm. For now. The rain kept falling and the city kept moving, and Lily Carter breathed and held on. The morning had not promised anything more important than rain and errands, but small things have a way of breaking in quiet lives. Lily had turned the corner toward the grocer when a shout cut the soft gray, sharp enough to make her drop the paper bag of oranges she was carrying. They skidded orange spheres on wet concrete, and a man in a uniform laughed loud and easy, as if laughter could sweep shame away like crumbs. "Come on, Miss Special Forces." "That's a movie line," the officer said, voice threaded with a boredom that pretended to be kind. He was leaning against his cruiser, jacket unzipped, a name patch that read Harris. He was the kind of man who had learned the sound of his own laugh and used it when he wanted to close the room. His laugh made a small ring of people look over. A barista on her break, a delivery driver balancing a crate, a mother with a stroller. Eyes turned. The world, for a breath, made Lily the center of a small, uncomfortable audience. Lily's face had gone tight, not from shock, she had expected ridicule in the city, but from a private, rising shame that felt heavier than the oranges in her bag. She had said the thing without thinking, a small defense when someone had asked why she seemed anxious. "My mother, she's in the Special Forces." It was a truth tatting at the edges, neither full nor false. Rebecca Carter had been many things, sharp, unpredictable, gone. The words were meant to hush the questions, not invite them. "You're making that up," Harris said, and his smirk was the pressure of a thumb turning a screw. "Maybe your mom's a nurse. Maybe she's a school teacher. Everyone's a hero in their stories." He flicked a look at his partner, who shrugged. The laugh came again, softer now, but the current of it ran through the small crowd. Lily could feel her cheeks burn. She wanted to vanish into the rain and into the pocket where the photograph and the note were kept safe. She forced a smile that felt like paper between her teeth. Then something shifted. The street's hum tightened, like the moment before someone says a name in a quiet room. A black SUV eased to the curb with the deliberate patience of someone who knew how to stop time without a shout. Doors opened in slow, controlled motions. A woman stepped out and moved through the rain as though the weather were a curtain drawn aside for her. She wore a simple coat, dark and tailored, boots that did not scuff. She carried herself like a person who had been given directions and followed them without question, and whose quiet had weight. Rebecca Carter. Lily did not have to read a name tag. The world, or at least the little ring of people watching, decided for her. Conversation dropped the way a dropped spoon stops a song. The barista paused mid-sip. The delivery driver's hand hovered over crate. Harris straightened so quickly it sounded like a paper being flipped. Rebecca's face was not what Lily had expected from photographs long folded in pockets. The photos were of angles and light and memory. In person, Rebecca had the kind of laid calm that happens to people who have learned to trade the hard way. Her hair was pulled back tight, a single silver thread escaping near her temple. Her eyes scanned the crowd with precise attention, and then, finally, landed on Lily. For an instant, the world narrowed to the space between them. Lily felt the photograph in her pocket like a heat against her thigh. Suddenly, a small, living thing, Rebecca planted herself close to Lily and offered no theatrical greetings, no explanations for the crate of looks pointed their way. She simply said, in a voice that was both careful and firm, "Lily." When Lily's name came out of her mother's mouth, the private ledger in her head faltered. The words did not belong to anyone who had been absent. They sounded like they claimed and commanded both. People in the crowd shuffled closer, without meaning to, drawn by the weight of a person they did not know, but whose presence seemed to answer some unspoken question. Officer Harris moved from smirk to something like polite attention. He checked his watch, the small mechanical gesture of someone reminded that time matters. "You know her?" he asked, the question thin as a blade. Rebecca's answer was at once simple and heavy. "I know my daughter." It was not an invitation to honor, and it was not a denial. It was a truth that asked for nothing except to be true. For a moment the rain talked to itself. Lily's heart tried to make sense of the sudden hush. People looked to Harris as if he might make a joke and send the tension away. He did not. He straightened and nodded, the officer's practiced calm descending like a curtain. "Sorry, ma'am," he said to Rebecca in a voice that tried to smooth what had been rough. He had the correct decorum now, but the laugh had been already cast into the air where it could not be retrieved. Then, before the world could settle, a small, folded paper slipped into Lily's hand. It came from a man at the edge of the crowd, a stranger with a cap pulled low. His gesture was quick, almost apologetic, as if he had broken an unspoken rule by passing a note. Lily unfolded it with the slow, terrified courtesy of someone opening a door after being told not to. The words inside were 3 short lines, written in a hand that had been sharpened on worry. "Do not trust her. Watch the left sleeve in the photograph. They are coming back." The paper smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old ink. Lily's skin prickled. The note could have been a prank, a leftover of someone's bad joke meant to stir gossip. It could have been nothing. Or it could have been the first clear bell of danger. The ledger in Lily's head clicked like gears, finding a new pattern. Everything she had been carefully arranging, the small routines, the pocketed photograph, the soft lie about her mother's job, shifted under the weight of these 3 lines. Rebecca's face had not changed when Lily read the note. Her mouth stayed the same, compact, as if holding the shape of a command. But Lily noticed for the first time in years a faint seam along Rebecca's left sleeve where the coat met the cuff. It was a small thing, an odd bulge, a thread pulled where a patch might have been. The stranger's words echoed in Lily's head like a drum. "They are coming back." Who? Why? For what? The crowd, sensing the quickness of something private made public, began to scatter like a flock startled into motion. Rain took the city again. Lily held the paper until the corners softened with moisture. She wanted answers from her mother, but when she looked up, Rebecca's eyes were already moving past her, measuring the distance to the SUV, the road beyond it, and Lily thought toward a horizon that was not simply the end of the street. The inciting chord had been struck. A laugh had been turned into an arrival. A note had been pressed into her hand. Lily had stepped from the small safety of routine into a space where questions were loud and answers were dangerous. The city continued on, indifferent in many ways, But a thread had been tied between the woman who had laughed and the woman who had walked from a black SUV. Somewhere, someone had decided that old things would not stay buried. Lily felt the ledger in her head tilt. This was no simple morning anymore. The crowd had thinned, but the air around Lily felt fuller, as if sound had weight now. People resumed their errands with the odd stiffness of those who had just witnessed something private made public. Lily and Rebecca stood under the same thin rain and felt, for the first time in years, the distance between them like a measured step. "You shouldn't have said that," Rebecca said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that carried an order. Her voice did not rise, it simply landed. She folded the coat around her hands like keeping a small animal warm. "You know how stories change on the street." Lily looked at her mother and saw the exact features from the faded photograph, same jaw, same small scar near the eyebrow. But the woman before her held herself like someone who practiced restraint until it became a habit. "I said it because I wanted them to stop asking," Lily said. Her words came out quick and raw. "I'm tired of pretending." "You said it to shut them up," Rebecca answered. "Not everyone wants to be called a hero in front of strangers. Some things," she stopped as if a list of reasons might make things worse. "Some things you carry quietly because they protect you." "Protect me from what?" Lily's question was thin with years of waiting. "From people thinking my family is strange? From being the weird girl with the gone mother? You left. You said you had to work. I did the bills, I did the grocery runs, I did everything. You think that's protection?" Rebecca's eyes softened for a moment, and something like regret flickered there, the way an old light bulb might glow before the current cuts. "I didn't leave because I wanted to," she said. "I left because it was the only way to keep you safe." She looked away, toward the black SUV where a small man in a gray suit stood talking into a phone. "There are things I can't tell you yet. When the time comes." Lily laughed, but it was a small, broken sound. "You always say when the time comes. When did it ever come? I've been 23 with when the time comes like a calendar with a torn page." Rebecca's jaw hardened. "I made choices that were not for you to argue about. Trust that I know what I'm doing." Trust sat between them like a bridge with missing planks. Lily felt the tautness of it every time she turned, every time she reached for something normal and found it gone. She wanted to be angry and needed to be heard. Instead, she found herself shrinking into the shape of a girl who had practiced forgiveness like a soft muscle. Mark Harris walked over slowly, his uniform reaching for the polite shape it knew. Up close, his face was flatter than it had seemed from the cruiser, like a coin washed of shine. He tapped a folder against his thigh with mechanical courtesy. "Ma'am," he said to Rebecca. "We didn't mean to." He gave Lily a look that tried to say sorry and curiosity at the same time. "Is everything all right? Did you need assistance?" Rebecca nodded, once, the kind of nod that closed the conversation without closing the meaning. "We're fine, Officer Harris. Thank you." The name Mark lingered for Lily the way a new chord lingers. She filed it away. He hesitated, then, as if listening to something only he could hear, asked, "Did anyone bother you, miss? I mean, did he harass you?" Lily's mouth went dry. "No." He laughed. She could not bring herself to say the rest. Her pride had been prodded in front of strangers and then patched by her own embarrassment. "It's okay." Rebecca turned to Mark for a fraction of a second, and Lily watched the exchange like watching a mirror suddenly show someone else's face. Rebecca's tone when she addressed him was different. Less mother, more equal. "You kept your cruiser too close to the curb," she said with a short, soldierly strictness. "It makes people nervous." Mark made a small, surprised sound, like someone caught making a mistake. "Ma'am, he straightened. "Yes, ma'am." His deference was real enough that Lily wondered what reputation her mother carried, even here. Mark's eyes flicked to Rebecca's left sleeve where the seam had that odd bulge. He did not comment aloud, but she saw the brief tightening at his jaw. He looked like a man who had recognized a badge he was not allowed to name. From the edge of the crowd, the man who had handed Lily the note, Daniel, she would later learn his name when Rebecca introduced him with a cold efficiency, waited as if he were afraid of being ordered away. His hat sat low, and there was a kind, weary stiffness to his shoulders that suggested too many late nights and not enough sleep. Rebecca walked toward him and spoke in a voice that was quick and private. Lily could not hear their words. She could only watch the gestures. Rebecca pointed once toward the SUV, then toward the narrow street that led away from the square. Daniel's face went misty, like someone remembering a map. When Rebecca returned, Lily took her in with a hunger that felt like a hunger for proof. "Who is he?" she asked. "A friend," Rebecca said. The word landed without warmth. "Someone who keeps an eye." "Keep an eye for who?" Lily demanded. The anger she had been stacking all morning rose like a small heat. "For you? For whoever you run from." Rebecca's smile was almost invisible, more a pressed suggestion of humor. "Sometimes for both," she said. "Sometimes for what was left behind." Lily felt the old ledger of explanations clack into a new slot. People are never one thing, she thought. Her mother had many names, protector, absenior, mystery. She had assumed Rebecca's silence meant a kind of cowardice. Now, Lily wondered if it had been a different kind of courage, the kind that asks a child to trust without rehearsal. That night, when they walked back to the small apartment where Lily had been living alone, the rain continued like a thin curtain. Inside, the room smelled of peppermint and the faint tang of the coffee that Lily kept on the counter. Rebecca moved with the same economy, as always, no wasted steps, no wasted words. She set the photograph Lily had always kept and took it from the jacket without touching the edges. Her fingers paused over the left sleeve in the photo, as if feeling a seam through paper. "We need to talk," Rebecca said. The words were simple. They carried the weight of more than one night's silence. But not here. There are people listening. Lily wanted to ask everything, every resentful question that had been rehearsed for years. Instead, she watched her mother with a new and dangerous curiosity. She did not yet trust Rebecca's reasons. She did not yet understand the forces that had shaped them both. But she felt, like a small bell in the dark, that everything had shifted in a way she could not immediately name. The incident at the grocer had opened a door. Behind it stood the complicated shape of a life Lily had not fully known, and perhaps a betrayal that had not yet shown its face. The room smelled like old coffee and paper, like the kind of quiet that holds its breath. Rain tapped the window in a steady, impatient rhythm. Lily sat at the small kitchen table, the photograph between her fingers like a coin she could not spend. Rebecca stood by the sink, fingers loose on the edge, her face turned away, as if the water had a sound she needed to hear. Mark Harris had left after a few polite words and some stiff smiles. Daniel lingered on the stoop like a man reluctant to cross a line. The apartment was small and simple, a life arranged in neat, necessary pieces. Lily had been ready to ask more questions about the SUV, about Daniel, about the seam in her mother's sleeve, but instead she watched for the first time at close range while her mother did something she had never seen before. She moved like a woman being unmade and then remade. Rebecca slid a hand into her coat and drew out a small, flat object wrapped in a kerchief. She set it on the table with a careful reverence, like a relic from an old home. Lily reached out as if to stop her, and then remembered she was 23 and had spent most of her adult life being careful. Her fingers hovered and then dropped. When Rebecca unfolded the kerchief, the thing inside was a patch of cloth the color of army mud. Embroidered on it was a symbol Lily did not recognize at first, a circle cropped with 3 jagged lines, like lightning trapped in a ring. Under it in small, neat letters was the name Aegis. Mark's face, visible now through the doorway where he had paused, changed like the weather. He had the look of someone who had just found a missing tile in a mosaic and realized the whole picture meant something else. Daniel went rigid, his hat falling back on his scalp as if he had been stripped of disguise. Rebecca did not look surprised by any of this. Her hands did not shake. "Aegis," Mark said, finally. The single word held more than recognition. It was a key in a lock. "That's not something you see on street corners, ma'am." Rebecca's throat made a small sound that could have been a laugh or a sob. "It isn't supposed to be here," she said. "Not anymore." She smoothed the patch with a movement that was half parent and half soldier. "I kept it because I thought I might need to remember what I left, or what left me." Lily felt the room tilt. Her mother had told her stories, vague clipped things about travel and work, but never this. The ledger in Lily's head slid. The left sleeve in the photograph, the odd seam, the note that had warned her, everything clicked into a shape she had not wanted to see. You were in Aegis? Lily's voice came out like a bird startled from a net. You left me. You said you were keeping me safe. You were part of this? The accusation did not sound like it needed an answer, but she still needed one. Rebecca met her eyes with a tired frankness. Yes, she said. I was. I am. The last word hung, strange and stubborn like a stone, and when you were 5, when your father, Michael, died, I was there in ways I cannot make simple. Lily's breath nodded. Michael. The name had lived in her memory, like a candle that had been allowed to sputter, but not to go out. Her father's death had been a fog of grief she'd learned to live inside. She had never believed any story that made her father's absence into an easy thing. She had always carved his space with questions and small silences. Now, the outline of that silence darkened into an image she had not been ready to hold. What do you mean? She whispered. What did you do? Rebecca's hands folded over the patch as if to hide it, and then forced herself to speak plainly. We were sent to a compound. Intelligence said there would be targets who would harm many people. The order was to take them down. There was a file with names and your father's name. Her voice cracked at that, the soldier's edge slipping. I signed the weathering orders. I signed things that set events in motion. Lily's knees felt weak. For a moment, she could not remember to breathe. You signed. The words refused to fit into the life she had known. Her mother's signature, something that had once been a permission slip or a school note, now seemed like an indictment on paper. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Rebecca said, quiet and harsh. He was with people who were on those lists. I thought hiding would protect you. I thought disappearing would stop anyone from using you. I made choices to keep you from being seen. But our choices are not clean. They leave their wakes. Daniel's voice came low from the doorway. Not everyone agrees about what happened that night, he said. Some of us think the orders were wrong. Others, well, some think those decisions should be counted. Mark's face had gone hard. Aegis has a way of making enemies, he said, and it has a way of making people keep secrets they don't know how to carry. Betrayal felt like a slow river running into a dry place. Lily's childhood memories of warm little breakfasts of a man with a laugh slid and shifted until they were new shapes. She saw flashes, her mother's hurried goodbyes, the long stretches when bills were paid and no explanations were given, the way Rebecca would sometimes wake at night and stare at the window like someone listening for far-off sound. You left because it was the only way to keep me safe, Lily said, testing the sentence now that it was hollow in her mouth. But you were part of the reason my life was broken. You were there when he died. Rebecca flinched, as if the words had found a place inside her she had been trying to seal. I was part of the team that night, she admitted. I carried orders. I was there. I could tell you 1,000 things, simple errors, shifted intel, a bad call. But that will not fix what happened. I promised to keep you safe. I believed leaving was the trade. Lily's anger rose, hot and animal. You left me, she said before she could stop herself. You signed papers that she stopped the rest of the sentence too sharp to say aloud. Rebecca did not shrink from it. Her eyes, wet and steady, met Lily's like a mirror. I chose you over my guilt, she said. I thought distance would be a shield. The betrayal was not neat. It was braided with love and fear and cowardice and courage all at once. Lily felt as if she had been handed a new map of her life, one that showed roads she had not seen, and a bridge she had crossed without knowing. Outside, the rain fell harder. The note's words circled back in Lily's mind. Do not trust her. Watch the left sleeve. They are coming back. The patch was proof that the left sleeve contained more than fabric. It contained history and danger. It contained reasons people might chase them. How long have you been running? Lily asked the question raw. As long as I needed to, Rebecca replied. As long as I thought I could keep you away from the reach of Aegis and their enemies. But running doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean people stop counting. They are counting now. Lily pressed the photograph into her palm until the paper bent. The face of her father looked smaller, as if a distance had been added between the picture and life. Her world had been rearranged into a room with doors she did not know opened. She had to decide what to do with those doors, and she had no map. Rebecca reached for her hand, tentative. "I kept you from them," she said, voice breaking. "Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I thought it would save you. I am sorry." Lily looked at that hand, roughened, used to orders and small kindnesses, and thought of the ledger of debts she had kept in her head. The list had new entries now. Truths that had been kept, promises that had been broken. Betrayal had a name at last, and it was her mother's. The discovery did not make the world simpler. It made everything heavier. Night came down like a blanket pulled too tight. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closer than the city had allowed during the day. Lily sat on the edge of the couch, knees drawn up, the photograph folded in her hands until the paper creased. The image of her father looked older and smaller each time she opened it. Grief, she had learned, compresses and then rearranges itself, so the person you loved fits into less space than they should. Rebecca moved around the kitchen with methodical movements, water on, kettle off, a pan checked without sound. There was a soldier's economy to those gestures. No wasted motion, no unnecessary speech. Every so often she glanced at Lily, as if measuring the distance between apology and explanation. Outside, the rain kept marking time against the window, a steady punctuation for a night that had unmoored days. If you watched Lily closely, you could see the ledger of her life work its way through her face. Her jaw set when anger flickered, softened when memory rose, tightened again when fear straightened its spine behind her ribs. She had always been a careful reader of people. It was how she survived. Tonight, she read her mother like a book with torn pages. Rebecca's hands betrayed nothing, only present, only busy. That made Lily angrier. Hiding behind competence felt like hiding behind a closed door when what she wanted was to be let in. A knock came at the door, quick and practiced. Rebecca started, then moved without alarm to the peephole. A familiar shape. Daniel, damp at the collar, his eyes tired but resolute. He let himself in with the small permission Rebecca gave with a nod. He closed the door like someone who was used to waiting outside thresholds. "There's chatter," Daniel said without preamble, leaning two hands on the kitchen table. His voice had the low, gravelly quality of someone who'd spoken too many truths into the dark. Not just the neighbor gossip. Someone's been asking about Aegis again. There's a sighting 2 blocks from here. Gray SUV, license plate swapped. Heard it from a friend who runs a garage. Rebecca's face tightened, a map of weathered lines. "They've started looking again," she said. The understatement made the sentence worse, like someone trying to close a breach with too thin a patch. "I thought the quiet would last longer." Lily's first instinct was practical. Call Mark Harris, tell him everything, hand him the patch and the photograph, and ask him to keep them safe. The second instinct, the older one coiled from years of absence, hissed that the uniform might not protect them. Mark was a face from the street with a name and an authority that meant polite sentences and paperwork, not necessarily safety. She had seen him straighten at the sight of the Aegis patch. He had known something. Was that knowledge meant to protect or to warn? "What do we do?" Lily asked, the question small but raw. It was the only tool she had left that sounded like control. Rebecca's gaze found the left sleeve again, as if the seam could be smoothed by sight. "We don't run blind," she said. "Running is what we did before. Now we choose." Her voice had the quiet of someone giving orders to herself first. "We make plans. We move when we must. We find the people who can tell us who's looking." Daniel's hand brushed the back of his neck. "There's a man in a cafe on Fifth. He's someone who collects things, old intel, rumors. If he's heard something, it's worth a look." He looked at Lily then, with that frank, weary kindness that felt like a small bridge. "You should come, not to hide, but to see what's out there." Lily wanted to refuse. She wanted to sit in the apartment with the photograph and the paper note and decide on her own terms when to open the door. Instead, Curiosity, older than most survival instincts, tightened like a string in her chest. "I'll go," she said. The decision felt like stepping off a curb into rain without knowing the puddle's depth. It was audacious and necessary. Outside, the city smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust, of things that did not trust the sky to hold them. They moved like people who knew the language of small safety. Route checked, lights observed, ears tuned to the echo of footsteps. At the cafe, a man with tired eyes and a knitted cap sat at a corner table, a newspaper folded over a laptop as though it were a shield. He watched them approach without surprise. The man's name was Anton. He spoke slowly, measuring what he gave away. "They're active," he said. "Not Aegis, others, old grudges breeding new money. Someone is trying to stir the old list back into play." He tapped the table with a finger. "The patch you showed me, Aegis, draws attention. People who were hurt by Aegis or who were collateral have reasons to make trouble. And there are people who would rather the world forget. You've got someone who thinks this is worth chasing." Lily listened and felt the floor under her feet get slicker. Each new fact slid into place like a tile shifting on wet mortar. She thought of Michael, of the way weekends had been hollowed out when he died. If his name had been on a list, if her father's end had been a consequence of orders, then grief had not been a private thing, but public, manipulated by strategies and cold decisions. Her anger mutated into a fierce need to understand. Not only what happened, but why and who had decided. On the walk back, the echo of a car behind them made Lily look over her shoulder. A black sedan kept the same distance, not close enough to make a scene, but close enough to feel like a pen closing. Mark's cruiser was nowhere in sight. Rebecca's hand found Lily's sleeve. Not a grip, not a command, but an imprint that said we are two against an unknown. That night, sleep did not come easy. Lily lay awake and watched the ceiling the way one watches a map when lost. Choices spun and narrowed. Trust the woman who had been both mother and agent, run and cut off the past entirely, or walk the road Rebecca offered and risk being pulled into the machinery that had already cost them so much. Each option carried a cost. At 3 a.m, a sound at the door made them both sit upright. The footsteps of someone testing a handle. It was quick and practiced, like a quiet question posed to a house. Rebecca's hand tightened, then relaxed. She knew how to listen when danger whispered. Lily felt the adrenaline prick her skin, old fear, new stakes. They had been noticed. Whoever was looking at the seam in the left sleeve was no longer content to whisper. Decisions would have to be made before dawn. The ledger in Lily's head, once a list of small, calm things, was filling now with harder entries. Alliances to test, truths to face, and a betrayal whose shape had opened like a wound that would not stop bleeding until someone named the hand that held the knife. The pier smelled of iron and cold water, a raw, briny breath that pulled at the back of your throat. Yellow lights swung on long cables, painting the wet planks in shaky puddles of gold. Wind moved like a restless hand across the harbor, carrying the distant groan of cranes and the faint, steady thud of a ship's bell. Lily's boots hit the wood with a hollow sound. She could feel the city behind her and the open ocean ahead, two kinds of distance pressing the moment flat. They had chosen the place because it was anonymous and because it had the honest harshness of nowhere to hide. Rebecca stood by the railing, coat buttoned against the wind, the Aegis patch tucked into the lining like a secret burned into fabric. Daniel waited a few steps away, his shoulders braced against the night. Anton somewhere in the dark, with a camera ready and a notebook like an old friend. Lily wanted the meeting to be simple, a handoff, a list, facts put into the hands of someone who could make them matter. She wanted the ledger of her life to be rewritten with truth instead of rumor. What came instead felt like the moment a dam gave way, sudden, loud, and with water enough to drown memory. The black sedans arrived like shadows folding into themselves. Doors opened with the cold control of people who had rehearsed this exact motion until it lost human tremor. Men stepped out, 3, then more, faces set under caps, coats zipped tight. Their leader walked slow as a metronome, He had a long scar along his cheek and an old anger in his eyes like something sharpened in private. His name was Victor, and when he smiled, it was the smile of someone waiting for a verdict. "You gave my wife a lie," Victor said without preface. His voice carried, and the harbor seemed to hush to hear it. He held out a folder as if he were showing Holy Writ. Inside were pages, photographs, names, the kind of dry paper a life can be folded into and made into evidence. Lily's name appeared in one corner of a page, and then in the next, the handwriting small and precise. Her breath hitched. Victor's eyes found Rebecca. "You handed them my Anna," he said. "You signed for it. You watched the list, and you chose." Rebecca's face did not change in ways a stranger could read. She crossed to him with a slow, deliberate calm. "Soldier learning how to take the weight of accusation without throwing. What I did was to try to stop more from dying," she said. "I thought I could steer a storm. I trusted men who told me they had a plan." "Men who told you what?" Victor asked. "Orders? Lies?" Lily felt the room inside her ribs narrow into a single bright point of heat. The ledger had become a jagged table where names were knives. "You signed his death," she said, voice small and sharp. "My father, Michael, he was in the wrong place." "You?" "I signed paperwork that tied his presence to a target group," Rebecca cut in, and the words were raw from use. "I thought the lists were accurate. I thought removing people would stop a chain. I did not want him to be there. I did not want him to." Her voice broke, and for the first time, the brittle suit of competence chipped to reveal something like a crater. "I thought by stepping away, I could protect you. I did not know how deep the rot was." Victor slammed a hand on the railing, so hard the wood shivered. "Rot? You call the bodies rot? Anna died because someone counted her as collateral. My boy doesn't have a mother because someone made a ledger. E just makes lists and you sign them." It was then Daniel moved, slow, not sudden, but with the only sure speed that matters in a place where words are bullets. He took a step forward and unfolded a small recorder from his coat. "Listen," he said. "You should hear it from the man who gave the order." He handed the device toward Rebecca with a look that asked for permission and forgiveness in one gesture. Rebecca did not flinch when she heard the voice, a clipped, bureaucratic tone with a name that felt like a thunk in Lily's stomach, Hargreaves. The recording was shabby and mechanical, but the command was clear. "Prioritize targets and minimize collateral, do not allow leaks." The words were the kind of cold calculus that turns people into spreadsheets. Lily's hands went numb. The world, the pier, the lights, the slap of water seemed to slow and flip like a page. The truth roared in the small speaker. Rebecca had signed orders, but she had not been a mind that framed them. She had been part of a machine that trusted men like Hargreaves, who hid motives under the name of security. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lily asked, not angry now, only small. "Why did you let me keep the empty bed and the quiet and pretend it was enough?" Rebecca knelt to meet her daughter eye to eye, the harbor wind making small flags of her hair. "Because I thought ignorance would keep you safe," she said, and the words were honest like cutting salt. "Because I thought the only way to keep you alive was to vanish. I am sorry beyond what language can punch." Victor's hand tightened on the gun at his hip. He was not a man to be swayed by recorded orders. He wanted punishment and was ready to administer it. "Sorry doesn't bring Anna back," he said, voice low and hard. "Someone must pay." A movement at the edge of the light changed the night. Mark Harris stepped from behind a mast, rain beating on his cap. He looked tired and small, and yet there was a steadiness in him that made people listen. He held up a thin file, police letterhead, chain of custody stamped in blue. "You want someone to be accountable?" he asked. "Start with Hargreaves. He's been moving men around and covering tracks. He's not above us. He was above you." Daniel took another step forward and put his palm on Victor's arm, not in a pleading way, but in a way that said this could end differently. "You wanted blood," Daniel said to Victor, "and they gave you a ledger. But it was Hargreaves who ordered Michael's placement near the target because he wanted a scapegoat to keep other men in line. My friend Anna was mistakenly placed. Hargreaves lied to Rebecca. He lied to everyone." The gun in Victor's hand wavered. For one trembling second, the men on the sedans looked like men who had been taught to hate and then given a new map. The harbor's bell call sounded, 3 cold notes, and in that span something in Victor's face cracked. Rage did not cool into justice. It folded itself into something less theatrical, exhaustion. Then, the small, sharp sound of a rifle from the pier's far edge split the air. Daniel doubled, a wet bloom darkening the front of his jacket, and fell like a knotted rope. Anton shouted, a human sound pinched by disbelief. Blood spread fast, flat, and terrible on the wood. The world narrowed to a tunnel where Lily could only hear her own breath. Daniel's head turned slightly, eyes bright and cruel with the thing he had always been devoted. Tell them, he mouthed to Lily, and she understood. Tell the truth. Expose Hargreaves. Let the ledger be for justice, not for skeletons. Rebecca's hands trembled as she cradled Daniel, the soldier, and the reluctant martyr. Stay with me, she begged, and her voice was as small as a child's. Daniel's fingers tightened once around Rebecca's sleeve. Left sleeve, the place Lily had been told to watch, then loosened like an exhausted clasp. Mark moved, suddenly, with the authority of a man who had been waiting to act. He stripped the rifle from where it had been propped, aimed past Victor at the pier's dark edge, and shouted a command that cut into the wind. Men scattered. The shooter retreated into the fog, swallowed by the night and the harbor's wide throat. Daniel's breath came shorter, and Lily felt the life leaving him in measured, painful pulls. She bent, not out of soldier's training, but because she could not bear to stand and let a man she barely knew and already loved in a way he did not know die in silence. He set us up, she said to the small cluster, voice threaded with the new authority of someone who'd had a ledger rewritten in one terrible hour. Hargreaves used orders as excuses. Rebecca was a piece, wrong and complicit, yes, but not the whole story. If we want justice, we take it to light. We don't trade blood for blood. Daniel's eyes inclined toward Rebecca, and in that small tilt there was forgiveness, or at least permission. Then, like someone letting go of a rope, his fingers slackened. He pressed one last, quick breath against Rebecca's hand, and then stopped. Silence sat like a heavy thing. Rain drummed on the planks, steady, indifferent. Lily felt a strange, fierce clarity settle in her chest. The ledger had been full of debts, but now it would be filled with names and evidence and truth, and with Daniel's dying charge ringing like a bell. Tell it. She stood, slow, as if raising herself from underwater, and looked at Rebecca. We will tell them, she said. We will put it where it cannot be folded into a file drawer. But you will answer for what you did, not because I want revenge, but because the ledger must be honest. Rebecca nodded, the muscles in her face folding into a broken, grateful thing. Around them, men with guns and men with grief looked like a country in miniature, many hands, some trembling, some ready. The pier held, all of them, a mother, a daughter, a dead man, and the long reach of a bureaucracy that had made lives into columns. The moral line was not clean. There were no bright exits. But Daniel's last act, sacrificed to make the truth louder, had set a new course. In the damp light, with the police file open like a wound, Lily felt the first fragile step of something like justice begin move. ChatGPT said, the days that followed moved like a slow tide, dragging fragments of the night out into daylight, where they could be seen and counted. News vans did not arrive, nothing cinematic, but paper reports and a few cautious interviews began to stitch the edges of the story into a shape the city could hold. Mark Harris worked the thin channels of his precinct like a man cleaning a wound, filing reports, handing the thin police folder over to investigators who were less interested in reputation than in paper that could not be ignored. Anton's notebooks filled with names and times. His camera held the wet light of the pier in its memory. Victor and the men who had wanted blood watched with a hollowed patience, their anger folded into quieter demands for accountability. Rebecca went with Mark to answer questions. She did not run. She made statements that were careful, true where she could be, silent where she could not be without doing more harm. The patch, aegis, was taken as evidence and catalogued by people in gray suits who smelled of old offices and colder logic. Hargreaves did not disappear into the fog. Someone high enough had a conscience thin enough to pass along the recording. Investigators moved on it. There were whispers, arrests, and the slow creak of the machine starting to unstick some jagged pieces of truth. It was not immediate. Truth never is. But it had been set into motion. For Lily, the change was less about headlines and more about the ledger in her chest. She found herself speaking in rooms she had once avoided. At first she read statements aloud, hands shaking over pens, then steadied and told what she knew, what Rebecca had told her, what Daniel had given his life to make plain. The words felt like an exhale she had kept too long. People listened, some with tears, some with anger, some with the face of those who had always eaten from the table of small certainties and now found their plates different. Rebecca took responsibility in her own way. She cooperated. She gave names. She apologized to families she had never met at tables that had once been prayers. There were moments when she would catch Lily's eye and, in that look, offer both apology and plea. I tried to contain what I did to protect you. I will take whatever comes. Do not let my protection be a reason for other silence. Lily wrestled with what justice meant. She wanted Hargreaves behind glass, wanted the men who had signed orders without looking into faces to be held to what they had done. But she also understood that vengeance could not stitch warm things that had been broken. Daniel's death had not made the ledger smaller, it had made it fuller with sacrifice. When victims' families came forward, people like Victor with grief that still burned, Lily learned to sit in the same room and hear sorrow that wanted someone to pay and sorrow that wanted someone to explain. The moral edges were not sharp and clean. They were worn by years of choices and careless thinking. At night, she would take out the photograph her father had been and turn it over in her hands, feeling the line where the left sleeve had been a secret now stripped to daylight. Michael's face in the photo had the small smile she remembered, a laugh that belonged to an ordinary man who had loved too well. Laying that photograph on the table, she learned to speak of him aloud, not as a ghost, but as someone whose place in the story deserved a name. Saying his name made the ledger less a list and more a map. There were days Lily felt anger like a living thing, sharp and quick. There were other days when she felt only exhaustion and the odd, slow wash of pity. She did not forgive easily. Forgiveness, she had come to see, is not a single act, but a weather that takes time. Sometimes she met Rebecca in the small kitchen, and they ate in silence, the kind of silence that is not avoidance, but a place where work happens, grief, apology, explanation, and the building of something that might in time be steadier. The city shifted too, not in grand gestures, but in small human corrections. Men in power who thought themselves invisible found their names in files. People who had been made small by secrecy found a place to speak. Aegis, as symbol and as system, lost some of its quiet. Investigations into old orders began to comb through old files. It was not perfect. Some doors remained closed. Some men found new ways to hide. Yet, the tide had changed enough that people could see the waterline where it had been before. On a clear morning, months after the pier, Lily found herself standing at a small memorial outside a courthouse. Daniel's name had been placed on a simple plaque, no grand monument, only an honest hand-sealed letter. He gave his life for truth. People had left small tokens, a folded paper, an old cap, a scrap of ribbon. Lily pressed her palm to the cool metal and felt the press of reality. One life traded to carry light into dark places. Rebecca's case would run its course with hearings and testimony. She would face consequences, as she must. Lily did not want her mother to disappear into a clean, bureaucratic punishment as if it could erase everything, nor did she want excuses. She wanted truth to be measured fairly and with the weight it deserved. That balance was not simple. It required that Lily hold both her love and her fury without breaking. When people asked Lily what she had learned, she began to answer with the small, blunt truths she had gathered, that secrecy makes monsters of systems and saints of survivors, that loyalty can be used as cover, That courage sometimes looks like leaving and sometimes looks like staying to face what you have done. She learned, painfully, that clarity does not heal all wounds, but it does make the next step possible. In the quiet after the storm, Lily planted a small green pot on the windowsill of the apartment she would keep. A modest thing, a sprig of rosemary, because she needed something that required tending and because green, even small, insists on life. Each morning she watered it and thought of how small acts of care shape the world in ways no ledger can list. The photograph still lived in her pocket sometimes, but more often it sat on the table where light could reach it. Rebecca's left sleeve would always be part of their story, a mark of the past and of an impossible bargain. Lily did not forget. She let the past be heavy and used that weight to shape a future that tried, in small human ways, to be honest. Justice, she realized, is not a single verdict, but a long practice. She would keep telling the truth, keep naming names where it mattered, sit with those harmed, and hold the quiet of what remained. The city would remember the pier as a night of loss and of a hard, stubborn beginning. And Lily, no longer merely the girl who held a cold coffee under an awning, felt like someone who had learned to hold her own ledger differently, with clarity, with courage, and with the steady, imperfect work of making things right. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.